Hi, my name is Jonathan Pinton, and I'm an American publisher of poetry, fiction, and cultural analysis. Recently, you made a video in which you objected to the infamous work of art Piss Christ, part of a series called Immersion, which is now being shown at the Edward Tyler Nahum Fine Art Museum. You objected to the work's content and to the museum's decision to show it in Midtown Manhattan, claiming that you would not have noticed if it was being shown in Chelsea. I appreciate that Piss Christ offends you, and I appreciate that you have the right to find offense and express that offense. I would, however, like to correct a factual error that you made repeatedly during your statement, in which you refer to Piss Christ as being nothing more than a jar of the artist's urine in which he dunked a crucifix. This is incorrect. Piss Christ is a photograph of a crucifix submerged in the artist's urine. The work of art is the photograph. Now, it's a common misconception, and if you'll bear with me a moment, I'll explain why I find it problematic.
Let's imagine, for a moment, a world in which Piss Christ had not become famous or controversial. Let's say you're in a gallery or a museum, and you're looking at photographs on the wall. You see a series of photographs of Christian iconography in strange yellow and orange hues. Perhaps, as a man of faith, you are delighted by these apparently pious photographs. You move to their descriptions, curious as to how they are made, and you find that the artist has not only been doing something normally seen as sacrilegious, but has made beauty capable of inspiring religious feeling, from their own waste. So the fact that these are photographs and not simply jars sitting on a shelf makes a big difference to them as works of art, and if you'll bear with me, I'll explain why I find them different politically as well.
You also express your belief that there is a double standard at work, in which freethinkers, which you refer to as liberals, feel safe in targeting Christians, whereas they are not necessarily interested in targeting other religions. You express frustration with President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton, claiming that they are apoplectic, unable to condemn the Muslim violence against free speech. I'm no great fan of the President or the Secretary of the State, and I certainly don't consider them free thinkers. But a president is not an ethicist, and I must say I prefer a president who seeks understanding between cultural enemies rather than war. And I must remind you of the works of the late Christopher Hitchens, who had very harsh words for Muslims who rejected free speech. Still, I acknowledge that you have some reason for perceiving a double standard, and I'd like to explore it. Some of the Muslim protesters, too, have expressed belief in a double standard, claiming that the West allows mockery of Muslims and Islam without allowing mockery of Judaism or Jews. You have expressed similar complaints on behalf of the Catholic Church. Specifically, you've expressed disgust with a lukewarm critical reception of the Passion of the Christ, complaining to Pat Buchanan that Hollywood is run by secular Jews who like anal sex. I don't always have anal sex, but when I do, I am inspired by Satan, as portrayed by Rosalinda Celentano in The Passion of the Christ. The thing is, here in the States, we freethinkers are accustomed to being attacked and vilified by Christians with fascistic tendencies, and we have grown knowledgeable about your worldview. Muslims with fascistic tendencies usually ignore us, and we typically know less about them. I admit that I do. As for fascistic Jews, while they certainly exist, and godless Jews such as myself are familiar with their worldview, they often wisely ignore us, meaning that our outrage is primarily occupied with Christian attempts to restrict free thought. Because of this, a double standard has arisen. And although I doubt it's as widespread as you believe, it is a hypocrisy, and it's one that I'd like to address. Now, like you, I'm a left-brained artist, more given to writing and criticism than visual art. Recently, however, you had the courage to take an Obama bobblehead doll and place it in a jar of brown Play-Doh, which you claimed to represent feces. I was inspired by your sculpture and decided to try my own hand at visual art. So I bring to you this photo montage of you preparing to suck Moses' cock.
Perhaps my intent is obvious, but you took a moment to explain your art, and I'd like to take a moment to explain mine. First, this computer-generated image is based on a photograph of a statue at the Bronx County Courthouse, built by a team of sculptors and architects from 1931 to 1934. The photograph was released under a Creative Commons license, and I'll have full information on that at the end of this video. I took a publicity shot of your face, put it on the body of a photograph of an exercising man, and altered it in order to create the illusion that there's a statue of you, there in the Bronx, preparing to suck Moses' cock.
You might find this image offensive, and if you don't, it's a fair bet that somebody does. But it's worth remembering. This is a computer-created photo montage of a digital image of a photograph of you and a digital image of a photograph of a statue of Moses, a historical and mythological figure who died millennia before you were born. Just as Piss Christ is a photograph and not a jar of urine, This is not the real thing. I might have offended you, but I did not place anyone's cock in your mouth. And you have the right to be offended, but you, along with anyone who has a religious objection to a work of art, even a truly contemptible work such as Innocence of Muslims or my 2012 photo montage, Billy Gets Lucky, must know the difference between offending someone's faith and brutalizing someone's person. Dr. Donohue, at this time I'd like to clarify that I am not here to speak about free speech. I am not here to speak about free thought. I am here to speak about the fundamental underpinnings of what we call morality, that attempt to build a set of ethics upon which everyone can agree. And I will state that a cornerstone of morality is the idea that the sanctity of symbols, however valuable and beautiful we may find them, is less important than the preservation of human lives and souls. In your video, you condemn those who commit violence in response to Innocence of Muslims, and I wholeheartedly join you in that condemnation. When I see people in Australia using their children as billboards to threaten beheadings, I see not people who are defending their faith, but rejecting its morality, turning their back on ethics, and using their religion as a shield to cover cheap tribalist hatred, an excuse to justify the internal savagery that they have chosen to embrace. I see not piousness, but fascism, that imbecilic childishness that nearly extinguished our species in the 20th century and may well yet. And when I see you, Dr. Donohue, with your cowardly threats of, "We wouldn't commit violence against a museum, but somebody else might," as if you were Eric Cartman trying to pull one over on a teacher, when I see you spending your time, energy, and resources condemning Piss Christ, I start to wonder why. And it didn't take a whole lot of time on Google to find not only your condemnation of homosexuality among consenting adults, but your defenses, your excuses, and your implicit justification of homosexual violence when it's conducted by a priest against a child. That's what you're saying, Dr. Donohue, with your recurring ad in the New York Times, when you use an outdated clinical definition of pedophilia and some massive logical leaps to claim that because the victimized children were not pre-adolescent, that the crime in play is homosexuality, not pedophilia, as if sexual violence against a post-adolescent female would somehow be okay. That's what you're saying when you minimize sexual molestation of young boys on the grounds that not all the incidents of pedophilia in the priesthood resulted in penetrative rape, as you did when speaking to Matt Cooper on Irish radio. This is why liberals, secularists, and freethinkers hate you, Dr. Donohue, not for your Christianity. The poet William Carlos Williams said, "No truth but in things." But you have spent your life attacking living, breathing human beings in the hopes of defending institutions and abstractions, choosing symbols over people. Perhaps it is unethical to insult someone's faith. Perhaps Serrano was wrong to produce Piss Christ. Perhaps Innocence of Muslims would be unethical even if it wasn't fraudulently produced. And perhaps there is an ethical dilemma presented by my soon-to-be classic 2012 photo montage, Billy Gets Lucky. But these questions fall into nothingness compared to the sort of villainy that would allow the molestation of children in order to protect a floundering institution. Your actions, just like the actions of those who would commit violence over a film, are not the actions of religious faith, nor are they inspired by surrender to a divine force. They are acts of tribalistic thuggery. You claim to speak for the divine will, while you defend the sexual molestation of children. Then you place a bobblehead in Play-Doh and claim that that will offend us. Dr. Donohue, you cannot defend us further. Take your toys, take your wit, take your broken excuse for humanity, and see if you can't get yourself fixed. Because as it stands, you are the beam in the church's eye.